In the movie The Matrix, Keanu Reeves is able to learn new knowledge and skills by downloading information directly into his brain. This information is stored in computer networks, but when he needs it, he can tap into it. The movie may be science fiction, but there's an important grain of truth to this picture. Most of our knowledge and skills isn't stored inside our heads. It's stored outside of our heads, in the people and artifacts and institutions that make up our culture. Hi, I'm Kevin Duddleplot, and this is the second video in a series I'm doing on the theme of critical thinking and tribalism. In the first video, I talked about the dangers of tribalism, which is very important, but I think we also need to understand some of the virtues of tribalism, how we benefit from our tribal nature. So in this video, I talk about how our distinctive human intelligence is actually a product of our tribal nature. Homo sapiens isn't just a social species, we're an ultra-social species. Individually, we're not well adapted for survival. We're adapted for survival in groups. Our groupishness is the key to our success as a species. At some point in our evolutionary history, there was a turn towards social survival strategies. And these social strategies became a part of the environmental context in which natural selection and other evolutionary forces operated. And in particular, this is the context in which our distinctively human brains evolved. For example, we know that prehistoric humans were among the most successful hunters in the history of the world. Ancient humans killed everything, including the biggest animals: mammoths, elephants, rhinoceroses, bison. We were so good at it, we drove many of these animals to extinction. And we know that the hunt was often a communal affair that could involve dozens of participants, and that it involved a level of cooperation and a division of labor that was unique to humans. For the bison hunt, for example, some had to be experts on bison behavior. Some were responsible for driving the bison along a prescribed route. Some waited at a trap location to kill the animal. The whole thing had to be carefully orchestrated. And then they had to process the meat. Imagine killing half a dozen bison, each weighing 3,500 pounds, and having to butcher and preserve the meat so that the tribe could safely eat it weeks and months in the future. What makes all of this possible is not just a division of physical labor. What makes it possible is a division of cognitive labor. Each member of the community had to master a skill that contributed to achieving the community's goals. Some were responsible for wielding the spears and killing the animals. Others were responsible for making fire, others for butchering. Now, in each of these, individual humans needed to be intelligent to do their jobs. But individual intelligence wasn't responsible for the success of ancient humans. It was collective intelligence that was responsible for their success. The ability to pursue common goals as a group and coordinate individual actions to fulfill those goals. That same capacity for collective intelligence is responsible for much of the world we see around us. Think of all the different trades that are required to build a modern home. Surveyors, excavators, framers, bricklayers, roofers, plumbers, carpenters, painters, electricians, landscapers. Large building projects have always involved a sophisticated division of cognitive labor. The broader point is that human social life requires a sophisticated division of cognitive labor. And this fact had a profound effect on the evolution of the human brain and other key features of human psychology. Modern humans emerge about 200,000 years ago, and they stand out because of their large brains, roughly 3 times the size of our early hominid ancestors. There's a long history of speculation and debate over what caused this increase in brain size, but one of the key drivers was certainly the cognitive demand of our communal social life. As human social groups increase in size and complexity, there are greater demands for communication and the ability to understand and incorporate the perspectives of other people and to share common goals. This sets up conditions for the evolution of language as a tool for making it easier to share goals and intentions. It also sets up conditions for developing internal models of the intentions of other people and the ability to reason about those intentions. If you're looking at a bison and aiming your bow and arrow at it, I have to be able to infer that your intention is to shoot the bison with the intention of killing it. Being able to reason about other people's mental states is a critical talent for working together in large groups. A consequence of this collaborative mode of living is that human beings evolved a collective intelligence that is unique as far as we know. Now, as we said, this collective intelligence requires certain abilities of individuals. First, we need to be able to share our attention. When a group of us is crouching in the grass waiting for the bison to come, our attention is focused on the same thing, the same aspect of our sensory experience. And we know that we're attending to the same thing. I know that about you, and you know that about me. We need to be able to share our attention in order to coordinate our actions. Now, once we can share our attention, then we can share knowledge about the thing that we're attending to. We can talk about common knowledge, the knowledge that is shared within the community about something. There are things that we know about the bison and the bison hunt that everyone in the community knows in virtue of participating in this shared collective action. And once we've got shared attention and shared knowledge, we can have shared goals, shared intentions. We can formulate plans and strategies that we intend to pursue together. And we can collaborate. Our brains have evolved to facilitate collaboration. Our brain and hormonal activity become synchronized when we collaborate. We take pleasure in engaging with others in shared activities. We're hardwired for it. Now, with these features in place, we have the infrastructure for the next big step, which is the ability to store and transmit knowledge, collective knowledge, from one generation to the next. A unique form of culture appears in our evolutionary lineage. A culture that functions as a repository of our collective knowledge and skills that we can add to over time and that accumulates over time. Learn a new skill, a new way of doing something, and that knowledge can be shared, stored, and transmitted through cultural practices so that it can be replicated and accessed by future generations. I rather like this metaphor of uploading skills and knowledge to the culture cloud so that we can access it at different places and times when we need it. In fact, the digital cloud that we're all familiar with is literally a part of this broader culture cloud. Most of our social learning is mediated by accessing information stored in the culture cloud. That's how we learn to read and write, for example. We're born with brains and bodies that have the capacity to read and write, but the actual skill of reading and writing is acquired by accessing knowledge that is stored in our culture, not in our genes. I like this cartoon by Randy Glassbergen. It's called Reading. It's how people install new software into their brains. It's funny, but it's also true. If we think of reading a book as a way of accessing information that is stored outside our brains, stored in the culture cloud, we are a uniquely intelligent species. But the way we make ourselves intelligent is what makes us special. We make ourselves intelligent by distributing our skills and knowledge throughout the community, in the minds of individuals, but also in our tools and artifacts and institutions. This stored cultural knowledge far exceeds what any individual human being can know, and it continues to grow and develop over time. Our genius as a species, the secret of our success, to use Joe Henrich's phrase, is that we can tap into this stored knowledge when it's needed, and we can use it to coordinate the complex tasks we engage in. It's what makes those distinctively human complex tasks possible. Now, it's not always obvious to us that our knowledge is socially distributed and accessed in this way. In fact, it's very easy for us to confuse our personal knowledge, what we actually carry around in our heads, what we can articulate if asked to, with our culturally accessed knowledge, which we don't carry around in our heads. So, for example, we have a strong tendency to think we know more about the world than we can actually articulate on our own. To use an example that I've talked about in another video, if I ask you, do you know how a bicycle works? You'll be pretty confident that you do. But if I ask you to explain how a functional bicycle works, or to sketch a functioning bicycle on a piece of paper, research shows that less than half of you will be able to do it without making mistakes. These are real drawings by real people, by the way. None of these depict a bike that would actually function. And many of you will be genuinely surprised at how hard this task was for you, how much you overestimated the depth of your personal knowledge. There are many different ways that human beings overestimate their personal knowledge. The one that I'm talking about here is known in the cognitive bias literature as the illusion of explanatory depth, or the knowledge illusion. The original research on this focused on our knowledge of devices that we're familiar with, like bicycles and zippers and flush toilets. But the effect shows up everywhere in our knowledge of just about anything that isn't directly within our area of personal expertise. What is compound interest? What is it? GMO. What are the parts of an atom? How does the greenhouse effect work? What are the signs and symptoms of depression? Our actual ability to give good answers to these questions is far below what we believe it to be. But our vulnerability to the knowledge illusion isn't so surprising if the story about the social character of our knowledge is right. Our brains just weren't designed to represent all of our knowledge in detail. Most of the time, what matters for our daily tasks is whether we can access the information that is stored outside of our brains, in the environment, in the community, in the culture, when we need it. We do this so naturally, so automatically, that we don't even realize it's what we're doing. So it's not surprising that for most things, the personal knowledge we carry around in our brains is sketchy and incomplete. It doesn't have to be complete if we have ready access to our cultural matrix of knowledge. But as we've seen, there is a downside to relying on this form of socially distributed knowledge. We routinely overestimate the depth of our personal knowledge. And that's a problem because it makes us overconfident about what we know, and many cognitive tasks really do require a certain depth of personal knowledge. Studies show, for example, that about 40% of Americans don't actually know what compound interest is. But most of those 40% think they know. They only discover that they don't really understand the concept when they're actually asked to articulate it. This matters because in most countries, we haven't solved the problem of automating management of personal debt or financial planning for retirement. So this deficit in our personal knowledge has real consequences. So I don't want to say that we shouldn't bother developing our personal knowledge. There are lots of reasons to do this, not the least of which is that it's essential to developing fundamental critical thinking skills. But I also think that if we take seriously this notion of collective social intelligence that is stored in the minds of individuals, distributed across the community, and in our cultural artifacts and institutions, then we should be spending more time thinking about ways that we can all benefit from this tribal intelligence. How to make it easier for individuals to both access and add to the intelligence stored in the culture cloud. How to most effectively use this intelligence to solve our collective problems. From a philosophy perspective, I think it's very interesting to think about the interplay between personal knowledge, the epistemology of individual knowers, and social knowledge, the epistemology of social groups. So in the next video in this series, I'm going to focus on a particular aspect of this interplay, which is about how human beings make judgments about what sources of information are reliable or trustworthy, and to what extent these are tribal judgments. Hey, thanks for watching. If you're interested in learning more about the science that informed this video, I've got an accompanying blog post over at kevindelaplante.com. And you can click on that link in the description below. Also, if you'd like to support production of these videos and the Argument Ninja podcast that I also produce, you can visit the support page at kevindelaplante.com to learn more about that.